Good evening, and welcome to your daily news briefing. I'm glad you're with us. Today is Monday, June 1st, 2026, and we have a lot to get through tonight. From a major political retreat at the White House, to a ceasefire announcement in the Middle East, to a landmark IPO filing that could reshape Wall Street. We'll also check in on a tennis legend making a comeback, and close with something a little different. A beer recipe from 1757. Let's get into it. We start tonight with a story that has been building all week in Washington. President Trump is backing away from his plan to create a $1.8 billion fund that would compensate people who claim they were victims of politically motivated prosecution under the Biden administration. And the retreat, by all accounts, is significant. Now, to understand why this matters, let's rewind a bit. The fund emerged out of a deal the Justice Department negotiated over Trump's $10 billion lawsuit against the IRS. A lawsuit blaming the agency for leaking his tax returns during his first term. Rather than paying Trump directly, which officials feared would look terrible, they cooked up what they called the Anti-Weaponization Fund. The idea was to draw from the Judgment Fund, an essentially unlimited pool of money Congress authorized the Justice Department to use for settling lawsuits, and use it to pay out Trump allies and supporters who said they'd been wronged by the Biden administration. Critics immediately called it a slush fund. And honestly, the criticism came from everywhere. Not just Democrats, but Republicans too. The situation became increasingly untenable. Senior Republicans in the Senate were furious. Senate Majority Leader John Thune said his party was still sorting through how to move forward and openly wondered whether Trump might veto any legislation to rein the fund in. That's the Senate's own majority leader expressing doubt. And then came the legal setbacks. A federal judge in Alexandria put the fund on hold entirely pending a hearing scheduled for June 12th. And in a surprise move, the judge who originally oversaw Trump's IRS lawsuit reopened the case, citing grievous allegations that the deal had been premised on deception. Today, the Justice Department announced it would abide by that judge's order, at least until the June 12th hearing. And privately, some administration officials reportedly exhaled. Their relief the court gave them a face-saving exit. As with everything involving this president, he could still change his mind. But those familiar with his thinking say he's been leaning towards scrapping the fund for days. Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana summed up the skepticism pretty bluntly, saying you're going to follow a court order doesn't tell me anything. You have to follow the court order. Democrats, meanwhile, are not letting it go quietly. Senator Chuck Schumer launched a coordinated effort to, in his words, kill the slush fund, and 3 Democratic senators introduced legislation to permanently shut it down. So that's the headline. But the story is really about something bigger, the limits of what even a loyal Republican Party will absorb. This is a rare instance of genuine pushback from Trump's own side, and it worked, at least for now. Staying with the Trump administration, there's a deeply troubling story tonight out of the Pentagon. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has blocked the promotions of at least 7 Navy officers, and the details of who was targeted make the decision hard to explain on any merit-based grounds. 3 of the officers removed from the Navy's 1-star admiral list are women. 2 are black men. The officers had been selected by a board of senior Navy admirals through a rigorous, competitive process where roughly only 5% of eligible officers get chosen. Hegseth has not explained his reasoning. The Pentagon spokesman said promotions go to those who have earned them, and that gender and skin color are never factors. But here's the thing. No women appear on the final 1-star list at all, despite women making up about 21% of the active duty Navy. And only about 2 non-white officers made the cut, even though sailors who identify as racial minorities make up nearly 38% of the fleet. According to Pentagon rules, the defense secretary is supposed to pull officers from promotion lists only for moral, mental, physical, or professional failings. No such failings have been cited. Instead, reporting indicates that some of the targeted officers were flagged because their names appeared on a website compiling so-called woke military figures, in at least one case, because an officer had served as a diversity liaison 2 decades ago. Senator Jack Reed, the top Democrat on the Armed Services Committee, noted that nearly 60% of the senior officers Hegseth has fired or sidelined are female or black. And a retired Air Force lieutenant colonel who flew refueling tankers in Iraq and Afghanistan wrote publicly, "The military I left in 2021 feels very different from the one we are watching today." She said she finds herself wondering whether she'd want her own children to enter a system like this. That's a haunting line. Also out of the Pentagon tonight, the Defense Department has declared its own press office a classified space, off-limits to journalists. For decades, reporters covering the military had relatively open access to the building and could interact regularly with department spokespeople. That's over. The Pentagon says the press office now houses speechwriters who handle classified material. But the net effect is yet another barrier between the public and information about the country's military. The New York Times has already sued over related access restrictions, and this latest move adds a new chapter to that ongoing legal fight. And then there's this. Judges across the country are raising alarms about the candor of Justice Department lawyers. Federal courts have long operated on the assumption that government attorneys play fair. That assumption is cracking. A judge in Rhode Island called DOJ's account in a case involving gender transition health records misleading, if not utterly false. A judge in Chicago found that DOJ lawyers improperly influenced a grand jury and then hid transcripts showing that misconduct. Another judge in Rhode Island referred a federal prosecutor for potential discipline after he admitted he knowingly withheld information from the court. A Harvard law professor who spent over 30 years at the Justice Department under presidents of both parties called this pattern an extraordinarily awful look. The concern isn't just about individual cases. It's about the erosion of the presumption that government lawyers can be trusted to be straight with judges. Once that presumption breaks down, the entire system slows down and becomes more adversarial. And right now, it is breaking down. Let's shift to the Middle East, where today was a day of whiplash. This morning, things looked genuinely alarming. The U.S. said it had intercepted Iranian attacks against American forces. Israel's prime minister was calling for new strikes against Hezbollah in Lebanon. Iran threatened retaliation. And Iran's semi-official news agency said the country would stop negotiations with American officials and seek to close the Strait of Hormuz, the crucial shipping lane that handles a massive share of the world's oil supply. That last part sent shockwaves through financial markets. Then, this afternoon, everything shifted. President Trump declared that there would be a halt in the fighting between Israel and Hezbollah, saying he had spoken with both sides. Lebanon's government confirmed it had received word that Hezbollah agreed to a mutual cessation of attacks. The situation remains murky. Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu issued a statement that left it genuinely unclear whether he had agreed to a truce, and we're watching the diplomatic back and forth closely. But at least for tonight, the immediate escalation appears to have been paused. The economic fallout from weeks of tension, though, was already being felt. Oil prices surged today. Brent crude jumped more than 4% to nearly $95 a barrel, its biggest single-day increase in almost a month. West Texas Intermediate, the American benchmark, jumped more than 5.5%. Energy executives are warning that global oil and fuel inventories are getting dangerously low. One ExxonMobil senior vice president said at a conference last week that inventories are approaching unheard-of levels and warned that once they hit bottom, prices could shoot up. The U.S. has been drawing down its strategic petroleum reserve at a rate of about 9 million barrels a week. At that pace, our strategic reserves will hit their lowest level since 1983 as early as next week. And those high gas prices are starting to matter politically. The average price of gas has ticked down slightly to $4.34 a gallon, but it's still more than $1 higher than this time last year. A fifth of Trump voters now say the war is not worth the cost. A third are unsure. At gas stations in Ohio, Michigan, and Maine, all key states with major Senate races this November, voters who backed Trump in 2024 are expressing a mix of frustration, resignation, and ambivalence. Some say it's a necessary short-term pain. Others say the president hasn't delivered on his promise to make America affordable again. And a few say they'd reconsider their vote. The midterms are 5 months away. This is a storyline that's not going away. Now, let's talk about something that could end up being one of the biggest financial stories of the year. Anthropic, the artificial intelligence company behind the chatbot Claude, filed paperwork today with the Securities and Exchange Commission to go public. This is a confidential filing, meaning the details aren't public yet, but it sets the company on track for an IPO as early as this fall. Anthropic's private valuation has ballooned to $900 billion, largely on the strength of its AI coding tools, software that can automatically write computer code and has been adopted widely by businesses. Last week, the company said its revenue run rate crossed $47 billion in May alone. To put that in perspective, Anthropic was founded just 5 years ago. It has grown at a pace that is genuinely hard to wrap your head around. Here's why this matters beyond Anthropic itself. Two other private tech giants, SpaceX and OpenAI, are also preparing to go public. SpaceX is expected to go first, potentially this month. OpenAI is preparing to file in the coming weeks. If all three pull off their IPOs, we could be looking at one of the most extraordinary moments in Wall Street history. Analysts are already talking about a potential tsunami of investment and employee wealth. Elon Musk, who owns about 50% of SpaceX, could potentially become the world's first trillionaire. And both Anthropic and OpenAI have pledged large portions of their shares to charity, which could also represent an unprecedented wave of philanthropic giving. The AI story doesn't end there. California's public university system, the Cal State system, went all in on artificial intelligence last year. They signed a $16.9 million deal with OpenAI to give 500,000 licenses of ChatGPT to students, faculty, and administrators, the largest single institution deployment of the technology in the world. And the result, according to a sweeping new report, has been chaos. The rollout was messy. It landed right as the system was also dealing with a $2.3 billion deficit, layoffs, department closures, tuition hikes. Professors felt blindsided and pressured to adopt AI tools without clear guidance on how. Students were caught in the middle, some embracing the technology, others staging protests. Faculty at San Francisco State have circulated a petition signed by nearly 4,000 people asking the chancellor's office not to renew the OpenAI contract. They argue the initiative is a step down the path of creating a really different kind of future citizen and worker, one who is, in their words, intellectually passive. There are no easy answers here. The question of how public universities should prepare students for an AI-transformed economy is genuinely hard, and no one, not the administrators, not the professors, and certainly not the students, seems to have figured it out yet. What's clear is that spending nearly $17 million on a technology rollout, while simultaneously laying off tenured faculty, has not gone over well. Also on the AI beat, researchers at Vanderbilt University have uncovered documents showing that a Chinese company called Geige Networks has been trying to develop AI-powered technology that could help authoritarian governments not just monitor dissidents, but predict who might become one. The company sells a commercial version of the Great Firewall. But according to leaked documents, they've been working on tools that would analyze location data, internet use, even what books and movies someone consumes, to generate behavioral profiles and flag individuals as potential political threats before they've done anything. Researchers call it predictive surveillance. One expert described it simply as what happens when mass surveillance meets AI. The work appears to still be in research stages, and it's been hampered by U.S. chip export controls that limited the company's access to the computing power needed to run advanced AI models. That's an important data point. American restrictions on exporting high-end chips to China have apparently slowed this specific category of development. Whether those controls hold under the current administration is an open question. Now let's turn to a story that deserves more attention than it's getting. The Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo is getting worse, fast. The Congolese Health Ministry declared the outbreak on May 15th. In the 2 weeks since, it has already become the third largest Ebola outbreak on record. Aid groups warn it could become the deadliest in history. The epicenter is Mungwalu, a remote gold mining town of about 150,000 people in northeastern Congo. New York Times reporters went inside the outbreak zone and found conditions that were, frankly, harrowing. The hospital has no test kits. Families bring food and water to sick patients because the hospital has none. Protective equipment, suits, goggles, masks, is in dangerously short supply. Bodies have remained in wards for hours after death because no one was there to remove them safely. The outbreak is thought to involve a species of Ebola called Bundibugyo, for which there is no approved vaccine or treatment. Experts say a vaccine could take 6 to 9 months to develop. Meanwhile, the hospital director has been chased through the grounds by angry residents throwing rocks. An isolation ward was burned down. A charismatic local preacher died of Ebola, and a crowd of over 100 men attacked the hospital, trying to retrieve his body for traditional burial rites, which would have almost certainly spread the disease further. One doctor on the front lines looked at the lack of basic protective equipment and asked a question that stuck with reporters. "This is the best we can do?" Please keep this story in mind. It deserves the world's attention. Shifting to the world of media, there was an extraordinary scene at CBS News today. Scott Pelley, one of the most respected correspondents at 60 Minutes, confronted the show's newly hired executive producer at a staff meeting and accused CBS News head Bari Weiss of, in his words, murdering the program. The meeting was supposed to be a formal introduction for the new executive producer, Nick Bilton, a tech journalist with no traditional broadcast news experience. Instead, with his voice shaking in anger, Pelly told Bilton he had slender qualifications for the job and told him that Weiss was brought in to kill it, and she's been doing exactly that. Bilton refused to be intimidated and pushed back. The staff reportedly applauded Pelly when Bilton left the room. CBS did not comment. The drama at 60 Minutes has been building for months, following the firing of multiple senior correspondents and producers last week, an event Pelly called Black Thursday. The future of one of television's most storied news programs is genuinely in question tonight. In Britain, the government denied entry to two prominent American commentators, Hassan Piker and Cenk Uygur, both of whom are progressive activists with large social media followings who had been scheduled to speak at events in the UK this week. The British Home Office said their presence may not be conducive to the public good, citing potential risk, without specifying the nature of that risk. Both men say they were barred because of their vocal criticism of Israel. The British government has not confirmed or denied that explanation. The decision has sparked a fierce debate in Britain about the limits of free expression in the country, which does not have an equivalent of the First Amendment. Civil liberties advocates and members of Britain's left have condemned the move. Others, including a Jewish protection group, have defended it. In Maine, Democratic Senate candidate Graham Plattner is pushing back hard on reports that he sent sexual messages to multiple women outside his marriage. Plattner, who is trying to unseat Senator Susan Collins in a race that Democrats see as critical to flipping the Senate, called the reports journalistic malpractice and accused a former aide of false claims. But this is complicated. The New York Times report cited both a current and a former campaign official. And on Sunday evening, a current campaign official clarified that Plattner was not disputing the existence of the messages, only the number of women involved. Plattner himself addressed his marriage publicly, saying, "Amy and I went through something hard because of me. We did the work, and I'm grateful for her every hour of every day." Some national Democrats are openly worried. Senator Cory Booker said on Sunday, "That guy has questions to answer." The Maine race remains critical to any Democratic path to controlling the Senate. A 6.0 magnitude earthquake hit Hawaii's Big Island recently, and the damage extends far beyond broken structures. The Kona district is home to some of the most prized coffee in the world, and the farms there rely on rainwater catchment systems for their water supply. The earthquake destroyed or damaged hundreds of those catchment tanks, leaving many families without water access. Some farmers have been filling 5-gallon jugs at public spigots. One farmer discovered the problem at night when he heard running water and traced it to his tank, which had burst and leaked 10,000 gallons into the driveway. The area had already been hit hard this spring by powerful storms. Farmers are now dealing with storm damage, destroyed water tanks, and insurance premiums that have risen since the 2023 Maui fires, all at once. It's a compounding crisis for a community that was already stretched thin. On wildfires, 2025 was the most economically damaging wildfire year on record, according to a new analysis. The fires that swept through Los Angeles alone caused roughly $40 billion in insured losses and an estimated $140 billion in total losses, the costliest wildfires ever recorded. Fires in South Korea and across the Mediterranean added to the toll. The worldwide total, at least $54 billion in insured losses. And researchers note something important. The total area burned last year was actually one of the lowest since 2002. The damage wasn't about scale. It was about fires hitting dense, expensive areas. Researchers call these urban conflagrations, fires fueled by tightly packed homes rather than vegetation. They burn fast, hot, and are difficult to fight. Experts say this pattern is the new normal, not an outlier. In Canada, the province of Alberta is heading toward a referendum in October that will ask voters whether they want to stay in Canada or hold a separate, binding referendum to secede. Alberta, often called the Texas of Canada for its oil wealth and independent spirit, has harbored separatist sentiment for decades, but it's always been a minority view. No more. Support for separation has climbed above 30%. The movement is tapping into genuine grievances about federal taxation, environmental policy, and a sense that Ottawa doesn't respect the province. Prime Minister Mark Carney is trying to defuse the situation, calling the referendum a dangerous bluff and comparing it to Brexit. The Trump administration has also been in contact with separatist movement leaders, State Department officials met with Alberta independence activists in Washington 3 times last year. And some in the movement have floated the idea of close economic alignment with the United States, even using the US dollar. This is a story worth watching closely. In archaeology, a genuine mystery has been solved. For nearly a century, thousands of massive stone urns scattered across the Xiang Kuang Plateau in northern Laos, known as the Plain of Jars, have baffled researchers. Local folklore said ancient giants carved them to brew rice wine. Scientists suspected something more somber. Now they have proof. A team excavating one of the urns discovered it contained the packed, disarticulated remains of at least 37 people, skulls stacked around the rim, thigh bones laid across the edges. It was an ancient communal tomb, carefully organized to fit as many remains as possible. The site dates from roughly the 9th to 12th centuries, and chemical analysis of objects found inside showed the people who used these death jars were connected to global trade routes stretching as far as Mesopotamia and South India, a civilization in remote highland Laos, integrated into medieval global commerce. The story of human connection is always bigger than we expect. From the Epstein files, emails and records released by the Justice Department indicate that Jeffrey Epstein banked his sperm at California Cryobank at some point before 2012, signed a new storage contract in 2016, and specified that if he died, his sperm should fall under control of his estate rather than be discarded. Whether his sperm is still being preserved is unknown. The cryobank says it doesn't currently store samples associated with Epstein, but declined to answer further questions. The revelation has raised complex ethical and legal questions about posthumous reproduction rights and what obligations, if any, the estate or a cryobank would have. It's a deeply uncomfortable story, but it's part of the public record now. Let's end tonight on some lighter notes. First, the movies. A 20-year-old filmmaker named Kane Parsons turned a YouTube horror series into a feature film called Backrooms, released by A24, and it made an astounding $82 million at the North American box office over the weekend, on a $10 million budget. Roughly 86% of the audience was under 35, and 44% were under 21. Hollywood has spent years wondering whether young people would come back to theaters. This weekend answered the question. Yes, if you give them something worth watching. Parsons is now the youngest filmmaker in Hollywood history to have a #1 movie. And in tennis, Serena Williams is making a comeback. Nearly 4 years after she announced she was evolving away from the sport, she is returning to compete in doubles at next week's Queen's Tournament, the prestigious grass-court warm-up event for Wimbledon. Williams is 44 years old and may be the greatest women's tennis player who ever lived. The chance to see her compete again against the current generation of top talent is genuinely exciting. The sport is better when Serena Williams is in it. And finally, a story that is part history, part science, and part toast. To celebrate America's 250th birthday, the New York Public Library teamed up with a craft brewery to recreate a beer recipe that George Washington wrote in his personal notebook in 1757, when he was a young militia commander fighting in the French and Indian War. The recipe was for what was called small beer, a low-alcohol drink served to troops when the water at camp wasn't safe to drink. The principal ingredient, molasses. The result is a couple of shades darker than modern beer, closer in color to rum. The library's curator of manuscripts described it as smelling like caramelized sugar and said she was surprised by how pleasant it tastes. Washington himself, it's worth noting, contracted dysentery a few months after writing the recipe. He went to Williamsburg for treatment, and that's where he met Martha Washington. As the curator put it, if he'd drunk more small beer, he might never have met his future wife. That's the news for Monday, June 1st, 2026. It was a day of political retreats, diplomatic twists, and a reminder that history has a way of circling back, in the form of beer, ancient urns, and stories that refuse to stay buried. Thanks for being here. I'll see you tomorrow.